On September 9th, 1949, Downbeat magazine printed an article on bebop jazz alto saxophonist Charlie Parker. The article began with the provocative statement by Parker, "Bebop is no love child of jazz." Parker goes on to differentiate between jazz and bebop, a distinction that is seldom made today. Artists from Louis Armstrong to Duke Ellington to Charlie Parker to Ornette Coleman are usually considered part of the same lineage. The writers characterise themselves as pushing Parker to define bop, and he is clearly uncomfortable doing so. Parker had recently returned from France, where he played at the May 1949 International Festival of Jazz. Reportedly, he had met French classical saxophone virtuoso Marcel Mule while in Paris. This article may be the first to quote Parker's intention to return to France to study European concert music, a plan that he never carried out. Importantly, he makes it clear that while he may gain some inspiration from European music, the music that he envisions will also have significant tracks that he does not associate with the European concert music tradition. Certain of Parker's statements we can clear straight away. Parker's birth year, reported as 1921, is actually 1920. His first Decca recordings with Jay McShann were made in 1941, not 1940. The Hindemith piece Parker had in mind was the duet for viola and cello. Parker's reference to the Academy of Music in Paris is unclear. He may have meant the Conservatoire National de Musique. On October 7, 1949, Dizzy Gillespies entered the debate with an article in Downbeat written by John S. Wilson. "Bird wrong, bop must get a beat, Diz." "The bird is wrong about the relationship of bop and jazz," says Dizzy Gillespie. "Bop is an interpretation of jazz," Diz told Downbeat. "It's all part of the same thing. Last month, Charlie Parker said that bop had no roots in jazz, was something entirely separate and apart from the older tradition. Parker identified the beat as the distinguishing factor of bop. It has no continuity of beat, no steady chug-chug, Parker said. This lack of a steady beat, according to Dizzy, is what is wrong with bop today. Bop is part of jazz, Dizzy said, and jazz music is to dance to. The trouble with bop, as it's played now, is that people can't dance to it. They don't hear those 4 beats. We'll never get bop across to a wide audience until they can dance to it. They're not particular about whether you're playing a flattened fifth or a ruptured 129th, as long as they can dance. The important characteristic of bop, Dizzy says, are the harmonics and the phrasing. Tossing in a variety of beats isn't essential. These are conclusions that Dizzy has reached after dragging his big band around the country for more than a year. As a result, he's revising his book so as to turn his outfit into a band that can be danced to. We'll use the same harmonics, he said, but with a beat so that people can understand where the beat is. We'll use a lot of things which are in the book now, but we'll cut them and splice them together again like you would a movie, so as to leave out the variations in beat. I'm not turning my back on bop. My band has a distinctive sound, and I want to keep that. But I want to make bop bigger, get it a wider audience. I think pianist George Shearing is the greatest thing that's happened to bop in the past year. He's the only one who has helped it along. He plays bop so the average person can understand it. Anybody can dance to Shearing's music. By doing that, he has made it easier for me and for everybody else who plays bop. It is interesting to note that in this interview, Gillespie does not make any reference to Parker's accusation of him adding his name to tunes that are solely Parker's. This article is also the source of the legendary story of Parker's 1939 musical breakthrough in Harlem. Note that in this original version, the account is largely told by paraphrasing Parker. In later books and articles, those paraphrases were represented as direct quotes of Parker, but it is unknown whether those alterations were based on Parker's actual statements, possibly tape recorded, or if they were journalistic license. In his 2005 thesis, Charlie Parker, The Analytical Study of 22 Performance Versions of Now's the Time, Volume 4, Jen-Kwang Chang explores the controversy and misuse of Parker's statement. Chang was only able to access a photocopy of the original article that was produced from a microfilm exhibiting only marginal print quality. However, the rendering you heard in Part 1 was taken direct from my copy of the original magazine. I can attest to Kwang's accuracy in reproducing the all-important Parker breakthrough statement. To quote Kwang, the article reveals that Parker's statement during a 1949 interview session was interpreted by interviewers Michael Levin and John S. Wilson. Charlie's horn first came alive in a chili house on 7th Avenue between 139th Street and 140th Street in December 1939. He was jamming there with a guitarist named Biddy Fleet. At the time, Charlie says he was bored with the stereotype changes being used then. I kept thinking there's bound to be something else, he recalls. I could hear it sometimes, but I couldn't play it. Working over Cherokee with Fleet, Charlie suddenly found that by using higher intervals of a chord as a melody line and backing them with appropriate related changes, he could play this thing he had been hearing. Fleet picked it up behind him and Bop was born. This interpretation has been used in several jazz publications and has become one of the key quotations used to explain the origins of bebop. For instance, Brian Priestley states in his 1984 publication, "Now I'd been getting bored with the stereotype changes, chords, that were being used all the time. I found that by using the higher intervals of a chord as a melody line and backing them with appropriate related changes, I could play the thing I'd been hearing." In Presley's book, the third-party interpretation of Parker's statement was represented as a first-person remark. This similar misuse can be found in other books. Gary Giddins, Celebrating Bird, The Triumph of Charlie Parker. His book Charlie Parker and Charlie Parker An Overview. Howard Lee's Jazz and Introduction. Robert Reisner's Bird, The Legend of Charlie Parker. Scott Sandvik's Polyharmony, Polymeter and Motive Development in Charlie Parker's Collective Widerstein. And Ken Vile's Bird's Diary. Carl Wodick, in his book Charlie Parker, His Music and Life, suggests that this misuse had been caused by the 1955 publication Hear Me Talking to Ya, in which the following statement is presented in a first-person format. I remember one night before Monroe's, I was jamming in a chili house on 7th Avenue between 139th and 140th. It was December 1939. Now I'd been getting bored with the stereotype changes that were being used all the time at the time, and I kept thinking there's bound to be something else. I could hear it sometimes, but I couldn't play it. Well, that night I was working over Cherokee, and as I did, I found that by using the higher intervals of a chord as a melody line and backing them with appropriate related changes, I could play the thing I'd been hearing. I came alive. In Ross Russell's Bird Lives, although Parker's interpreted statement is not presented in first-person format, Russell has clearly romanticised the interpreted statement in the 1949 Downbeat article into fictional writings. One morning at Dan Wall's Chili House, an all-night restaurant at 7th Avenue and 139th Street, Charlie was jamming with a rhythm section led by guitarist Biddy Fleet. They were working Cherokee. Charlie had been over the changes countless times and the tune was beginning to sound stale. Charlie got to thinking, there's got to be something more, some new way to go. Then an idea struck him. If he played the top notes of the chords instead of the middle or lower notes, he would have a new line. It was worth trying. Asking Biddy Fleet to continue, Charlie played through another chorus. The notes sounded strange, but it worked. He was using the upper intervals, 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, skimming along on the very tops of the chords. As to the actual meaning of appropriate related changes in Parker's interpreted statement, the information can be found in Roy Carr's A Century of Jazz, which presents Biddy Fleet's remarks regarding the use of the appropriate related changes, quoted in the following paragraph. The remark of guitarist Biddy Fleet, who participated in the Chili House jam session with Charlie Parker in 1939, as mentioned in the 1949 Downbeat article, might help researchers to further understand Parker's interpreted statement. As Biddy Fleet later explained to the writer Ira Gittler, the voicings of my chords had a theme within themselves. You could call a tune and I'd voice my chords in such a way that I'd play the original chords to the tune and I'd invert them every 1, 2, 3 or 4 beats so that the top notes of my inversions would be another tune. It would not be the melody to the tune I'm playing, yet the chords, foundation-wise, is the chords to the tune. In Bebop, the Music and Players, Thomas Owens clearly states the controversy regarding Parker's interpreted remarks in Downbeat, but his statement regarding appropriate related changes quoted in the following paragraph is questionable. Backing them with appropriate related chord changes is almost meaningless. The mental image of a saxophonist backing himself with any chord changes while playing his saxophone in a pre-electronic music age is surrealistic. Perhaps Parker in 1939 had a vision of the MIDI-led music environment of the 1980s. In Lawrence O. Koch's Yardbird Suite, a compendium of the music and life of Charlie Parker, Koch states that Parker told Leonard Feather, "For instance, we'd find that you could play a relative major using the right inversion against a 7th chord, and we played around with flattened fifths." Even though Koch's writing does not suggest that the statement regarding the harmonic breakthrough is Parker's first-person remark, it is still questionable to state this issue without referring to the original material. Taking into account Chang's criticism of Koch there, I think personally this is an important statement. And if you put this statement together with the original statement from the Downbeat magazine, you can kind of see what Parker's actually talking about when he's talking about we could play relative majors. It brings in something completely different to what everybody's been thinking about. And I will be explaining my theory on this in part 3. Okay, so I'll see you then. Bye.